Hello and welcome to another Pharaoh stream with myself, Pharaoh, and we're going to be going through Interwar Art at the Royal Academy, 1938. Yes, it's been a little while. In between casts, I've been busy working away on the new show. I mentioned this last time, I believe. We've got an art show happening in London in October. I think it is the 7th to the 12th, or we'll be packing up on the 12th, so don't go there. Go to cudo.gallery for more information. I will be doing a stream in the next month or so, taking people through some of the collaborators, introducing you to some of the new artists we've got involved. Should be really cool. Block your diary out. North London, sort of near King's Cross Station, 7th to the 11th. Anyway, on to the matter at hand. Why has it taken so long? Well, like I said, I've been busy. I have all the last pieces to take us up to 1940 now. I also wanted to spend a bit of time on 38 because I think this is a key moment in the Royal Academy where we go from, I guess, kind of post First World War. It's been exceptionally open in terms of its ideas. I think you need to really respect what Ricketts did. I've been looking through some of his early shows in the 1910s as part of the International, and many of the faces that we see in the RA in this interwar period are also at the Grosvenor, partaking in Ricketts' International exhibition. But obviously he's dead by this point. Even still, I think that his kind of influence about trying to kind of cultivate, like, what do you do with new artists that are trying to push things forward? Do you take them in, or do you reject them? And I think what Ricketts has always tried to do was to kind of accommodate well-respected older artists. So again, you can see at the beginning of those interwar years, there were lots of kind of Sargent-esque, more old school painters, but also to give a voice to those kind of younger generations once they've established themselves. And I think this is another key point. It isn't to just simply admit the avant-garde just because they're there. You have to sort of prove yourself. You have to spend some time being able to, I guess, kind of cultivate your style a little bit. So a lot of the stuff you see in the interwar, like I said, is actually, yes, it's the RA, but it is more avant-garde. It is kind of more symbolist. Again, look at Philpott, for example. Very, very out there. Some of the Sims work, very out there. But all of those guys have heritage, have years of experience under their belts. They're not flash in the pan. So I think that's what was trying to go on. However, and they were doing that again with someone like adding in Stanley Spencer in the previous years, trying to identify some of these people that are serious long-term artists that have cultivated a style, and to try and bring them into a degree. However, this is the year that there's a big break in what's going on, and it's really over this painting here, Wyndham Lewis's T.S. Eliot portrait. Now, obviously, Wyndham, very interesting figure in my opinion, both politically and artistically. He is, a thinker, pioneer, excellent artist. What is interesting about Lewis, though, is that by this stage of his career, so again, he's been working for like the last 30 years, producing significant works, I would say. If you compare this to some of his other pieces, this is exceptionally pared back in style. Yet it contains all of the best elements of Lewis at the same time. So, for example, here this is obviously the poet T.S. Eliot, Wasteland, quartets. Excellent work here. And we've got this combination of kind of casualness, but deep meditation at the same time. Very serious man, deep in contemplation. But just with the handling of some of the surfaces and the textures here, you can see some really lovely work. I mean, this suit, in my opinion, is just exceptional. Philpott tries to do something similar to this, but goes a slightly different direction. Look at the kind of almost kind of brown highlights coming through, scraped over the top, very roughly, the deep blues. He also is handling these shapes like some of his more abstracted figures of an earlier period. But again, he's really reined it in by this point. So what he is trying to do is to create something a bit more palatable from his style. And I think this is one of my favorite Wyndham Lewis paintings, if I'm honest with you. Totally brilliant. It was submitted, but then controversially rejected. Now, there was a change of president, I think, the previous year. But I would say what has been going on is a large voice towards a form of like awful conservatism. And I think, conservation, obviously, I think is important. It is part of any kind of organic society and any organic art. And I think, again, depending on the time, there's times of innovation and times of conservation. But the arch conservators were led by an artist called Munnings, who I've yet to put any of his works inside because he is your kind of standard, what I would describe as like horse painter. Very countryside focused, very aristo focused in the worst sense. And I don't really mean, maybe that's a bit mean because there are many wonderful aristocratic patrons. But I think for me, mine represents this big shift away from trying to reconcile the avant-garde and the existing society and to push them out and to stabilize the Royal Academy and accepted art into a very bland and stodgy form of art. And this is why I think this is an important moment, because Wyndham Lewis isn't accepted. He never goes on to, take a significant professorship at any of the major art schools. He never has a following. He never has any kind of significant apprentices that really kind of follow on in his style or his teaching idea in a similar kind of way. While Munnings does, I would say. So by blocking this painting, he really ruins Wyndham Lewis's career at the end of his life. What should an artist be doing at the end of his life? He should be teaching. He should be inspiring the next generation, becoming that grand patron, well respected, passing on his knowledge to the next generation. And so there is an interesting moment in 38 where the Royal Academy reject. This is not even really the avant-garde. I mean, look at this. This is, by this stage, we've had more controversial paintings than this. Look at some of Philpott's, but 5 years ago. Look at some of those Sims paintings. This is not a controversial painting. This is merely a hit job by Munnings on a kind of art that he doesn't really like, which is specifically, I would say, derived from that Roger Fryean school of a focus on the sensuousness of art and a man's raw interaction with individual works. And the reason why I've got this painting here is this is one of Munnings' works, which is a send-up of this new form of art that's in here. It's called The Great Spectacle. And it is ironically, I would say, one of Munning's best paintings because it's not a bloody horse painting. We see a number of kind of older gentlemen kind of pining around these various abstract forms here. So we can see some cubist-esque pieces here, some more abstract pieces of work, and you've got the kind of young society lady here taking a look, and all of the critics, some of who look a little bit like Fry, pining about it. I think there's another name for this painting, which is kind of like, does art need a subject? And again, I think that's a really interesting question. But what this is Munning saying, I don't like you, I don't like what you're doing, which again, I think is fair enough to a degree. But like I said, one of the reasons why the Royal Academy was so successful during the interwar period is this process of reconciliation and letting people in. In fact, it's even done that earlier than that, because if you think about the pre-Raphaelites, who to us are so establishment now. The pre-Raphaelites are more establishment than academic painters of the 19th century. But in the 1850s, they were controversial. But the RA did eventually let them in after they'd proven their worth and they'd won acclaim through their paintings. So I think I do appreciate what Munnings is trying to do here. He is trying to say, I don't like this kind of art. But does Wyndham Lewis really, is he part of this set? I wouldn't really say so. He is not that extreme. And also, look at a painting like this. Is this kind of Picassian cubist full abstraction? By no means. This is really a very figurative painting. So I think this move by these kind of arch conservatives to block the future of the RA, well, what happens basically? If I've been looking ahead into some of the shows post 1940, and it's just incredibly boring work. It is. It just sort of reduces down to landscapes, portraits of the aristocracy and famous people, and horses and country scenes, and it's kind of like, oh well, where is the depth and the range of subject? There's so much interest in the subject. Like, it's ironic that he says, does art need a subject? Because Munnings himself just has no breadth in his work, even though he's technically a very fine painter. His paintings sell for as much as a Stubbs do, for example. Stubbs, I love a Stubbs, really respect Stubbs, and I do respect Munnings to a degree, but it is his snobbish nature. This is what Fry is talking about when he goes on about the snobbishness of the art scene. It's the inability to recognize value outside of one's own specialty areas. Now, I think that the long-term upshot is this moment actually ruins the RA, because there's this period of maybe 20 years of the RA in the doldrums. They become, like I said, they become ossified. They're kind of stuck in the Munnings rut for 20 years until our good friend Wheeler, the sculptor of the aerial of the bank, he takes over, and what he does is to try and open up the doors again for all of this kind of young art that's going on that has basically been ignored by the RA. However, I think there is a big problem with that, where Wheeler goes the other way, because there's not been this kind of slow introduction of the new and this kind of organic building up of work. There's kind of like an explosion, and I would say it is not a good explosion as well. If you see the work from the 60s and the 70s, it's your pop art, your extreme abstraction, etc. And so we sort of flip from one form of art to a totally different kind of art. And then, interestingly, since that moment, since Wheeler took over as RA, we have been in a status lock where there is a certain type of artist that gets into the RA. literally since that Wheeler point. It just happens to not be your horse painter. It happens to be your abstract painter. And I really feel like if Munnings had only not pushed to have this painting blocked, we would be literally living in a different reality. That being said, I can't put the weight and the blame purely on Munnings. I think you've got to understand the political moment as well. Wyndham Lewis associated, with the right wing, with connections to Italian fascism as well. And who are we at war with? Now, bear in mind, Kenneth Clark himself was working with Mussolini on shows at the National Gallery, but 10 years ago. Fascist Italy was an ally of Britain, but 10 years ago. This is what Orwell goes on about when he talks about, whatever, Oceania is our new enemy. So, because the political mood have shifted because of World War II, this is as much a political hit job on Wyndham Lewis because of his beliefs and his associations as it is an artistic one as well. And all I can say for that is there's one other element to this as well, actually, which is actually the changeover of the king, because I think a lot of the patronage that was tied up by Edward was basically stopped when George took the throne as well. So a lot of artists had put their stake on his work, while George was associated with the Munnings crowd as well. So I think there's something political. I think there's something, but again, that itself is a political thing. It was a political motivation to get rid of Edward from the throne as well. So it is an interesting. I do believe that the ruin of the RA happens in this year, and it essentially happens because of the Second World War. And also because Munnings for me represents the kind of Churchillian conservatism as well, which is, like I said, a very boring, very safe kind that only wants to do what it wants to do. So there we go. I've said my piece now. Let's go into some of the other artworks, but just a little bit of interest to there. And this is also why I'm kind of stopping at 1940, because I just, having looked through, several little snapshots from the 40s onwards, it's just, there's nothing worth going through, in my opinion. Maybe one day I'll go through I'll get stuff out at a library and see if I can find anything good during that time period. There is some okay stuff, but we're talking like one or two pieces in an entire year. Okay, onto the artwork. We're going to start off with Charles Gear here. Gear, remember, is one of our landscape painters. He's doing these kind of silk paintings. Again, you have to see his colors, really. Just look up some of the Gear paintings for real, because he doesn't have a lot of detail on it. It's very impressionistic, but there's a lot of depth of tone and depth of color in there. Beautiful blues, beautiful pinks. And, this is you can sort of see his kind of putting the kind of rays of light coming down. We've got a little bit of human interest here with the bridge on the right-hand side. So all in all, I think this is just a very lovely, lovely painting, a good contrast. And again, the kind of mountains and lake piece is interesting because you don't get that much in England. I think maybe this is a Scotland or Irish painting. Okay, Olsen back again. Olsen, I'm just always amazed by him. He has produced just so many works. Again, is that a good thing or not? Well, I think there's something nice about that, in the sense that it makes them accessible, in the fact that, again, maybe he's never going to have this kind of one perfect work that's going to stand out. But I think there is to be said for something who is good, that is producing lots of stuff, because it means that more people can enjoy his work ultimately. We've got another nice moonlit scene here. Again, I think Olsen does best in these kind of stormy conditions, the night time, and maybe some of the kind of sun rising and sun setting, when you see some of his colors. sort of like it's interesting to sort of track his progress a little bit, because he starts off his career quite loose, a little bit impressionistic, then tightens up, and towards these last 20 years, he really loosens up once again. Very light touches across there, but still, very nice painting. Okay, this is Sidney Lee, The Ravine. I've been trying to chase down some of these Sidney Lee paintings and see if I can find any in art galleries, but it's very, very difficult. For some reason or other, Lee is not that well collected, and maybe a little bit forgotten as well. But I do think he is like this significant contemplator of these rocky forms, these mountainous forms, like powerful edges, etc. I quite like the verticality of this as well. It's about darkness. It's about water flowing, and again, his colours are very, very vivid at the same time. These kind of strong yellow and green tones coming through. Okay, I think we've got some posthumous paintings from Philpott that were never completed. And again, this is called Mother and Child. I mean, could be a little, he's a big classical guy, so maybe there's some allusions to kind of Venus and Cupid here. But he's got, and the reason why I say that is because they're both nude, and the kind of use of robes here. But I just think it's just such a shame that Philpott died when he did, because it's just a really interesting style that he cultivates at this point, which really combines the best of realism. I mean, just look at the young man's body across here. It's very, very accurately done. You 100% believe every single muscle grouping on there. Again, it's painted in this kind of loose, interesting style, the rough brush strokes. And then again, the heads almost kind of like, they seem very, almost like Venetian Gothic in the faces. It's these very kind of interesting faces. And again, this is those first early years of Philpott trying to go into this like quote extreme modernist slant, and not that successful, in my opinion. But by this time, he's really got a good style that's very interesting. And again, the tragedy of time itself, I feel like Philpott would have been an amazing teacher and could have cultivated an entire school by himself through his work. And I think a real genius and a real star that's lost to us. Russell Flint. Okay, I'm gonna. Here's the thing about Flint. I feel like Flint, by this point, goes through a different phase. A lot of his works to this point have been very interesting to me, partly because of the kind of classical nature, the classical illusions, etc. But also, he is one of the best painter of women during this time period. He's a brilliant nude painter. He understands the nature of woman, understands what makes them beautiful, why they're beautiful. But I would say that towards his older years, he churns them out a little bit, and also he moves away from interesting classical allegory into just kind of straight up nudes, or kind of like naturalist. I mean that in the sense of like French naturalism, that is people depicted doing daily scenes. He's like particularly interested in kind of Spanish life, for example. And for me, it's just not as interesting, because with the classical stuff, it is more symbolic, it's more thoughtful. You're having to work on your composition a little bit more, because you're having to include different references, different elements. There's a story element to it always. So it kind of pushes you a little bit harder as a painter. This, for me, sort of represents the kind of more the print slop Flint. Again, sorry to be so rude, but it is true, where Flint was exceptionally popular in terms of prints. If you try and buy any of these guys' works I'm talking about right now, you will find Flint's name associated with hundreds of thousands of prints, many of them not good quantity. I would say that maybe only Dali himself has had so much kind of slop associated with his kind of print work. So like, he does still produce one or two kind of bangers, but this is sort of the beginning and the end, and these kind of like slightly lazier pieces. But again, that's fine. What happened to Flint? Again, it's so fascinating to me just how pushed out all of these interwar guys become from society post this moment. Because if you look and see who's teaching in schools, it's not them. Like Wheeler is probably the kind of biggest name. He's very influential, I would say, and well respected. But he's also not the best sculptor by far. Why do so many of these artists end up not teaching and pass on their knowledge? Do you know what I'm saying? There's this really interesting moment where, for some reason or other, they're not selected, or they're not asked to, or they're kind of pushed out, and there's an intentional trying to kind of stop these guys from carrying on their style. Okay, this is a Rannoch Moor by Oliver Hall. I'm not sure if you've had a Hall painting in here so far, but I think what I really liked about this was the bleakness of it. And again, I think everyone is like, oh, landscapes are boring. And it's because you're not looking at kind of breadth of landscape. I mean, compare this to a Constable, or even some of Gainsborough's kind of more pastoral pieces. Constable is about richness, about the verdant greens. It's about life, and there's a general jollity to a lot of his paintings. Look at the Rannoch Moor here. It's not necessarily a sadness, but there is a bleakness. There is a sense of scale to this painting as well. Just look how 1/3 of the painting is land, while the other 2/3 are sky. A mountain in the distance here. We've been put in our place. We are just nothing but a small human being in this vast landscape. And the landscape itself, this kind of deep darkness to it. It's not like the plain of a desert. There's still life there, but it's something small and tender. I think that's what's interesting about the Moor. There is a bleakness to it, but there is a life, but it's a hard life, a rough life at the same time. So I like that Oliver really captured that kind of moment and that kind of power in this painting. Really, really good. We've got another Algernon Newton here, and again, I think this is actually one of his better pieces. We've got his usual beautiful style, this kind of like beyond photorealism piece, and it's called Summer. We've got these trees with tons of leaves on them. It's verdant. It's interesting. There's a mountain in the distance, but her eyes are brought to attention by 3 youths who are all skinny dipping in the lake. And again, I think it's just captures that moment of the blooming, and what is summer like. I really like the shadows as well. Algernon has this quite big value thing. If we just go back, did I delete it? No, I did. If we see some of the other paintings, you can see that sorry, by value I mean how bright are the brights and how dark are the darks. And you can see here we're going almost to black with several of the shadows here, or the trees in shadow, and we're almost going to white with some of the highlights from the trees or some of the figures. So there's this huge range. You'd almost count this as like a chiaroscuro or something like that, really. And I think for a lot of Newton paintings, it's it just doesn't hit in the same kind of way. But I really appreciate this one. I think this is really interesting. Definitely worth looking up. And his colors are really good as well. Very interesting. Okay, we've got a Harry Morley here. We haven't had a good Morley for a long time, and this is, I think, one of the really